All right. Thanks for being patient with us as we got our next speaker ready. Closing out the day is Kody and his talk, The Budget Hacker's Arsenal, a review of microcontroller-based cyber weapons. The world of hacking has a secret. Power doesn't have to come with a high price tag. We're going to dive into the world of budget-friendly microcontrollers with Kody and discover the might of the ESP8266, ESP32S2, and others in the realm of cyber warfare. He's going to demonstrate microcontroller-based projects using the ESP8266, ESP32S2, and other platforms to perform Wi-Fi phishing, HID, and USB attacks, and bleeding-edge Wi-Fi research. And with all that said, I'm going to hand the floor over to Kody. Thanks so much for joining us, and look forward to hearing your talk.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm excited to be here. This is one of my favorite subjects, and I spent a good amount of time working with microcontrollers as a complete beginner. So it's my pleasure after a couple of years to kind of come back and for other people who might be new to working with microcontrollers in an offensive setting, teach a little bit about what I have learned. And if you're excited about any of these that you see on the screen right now, I do have to warn you that these are the AI expectation of what a cyber weapon looks like. These are not any of the actual microcontrollers we'll be working with today, but you can dream, right? So just wanted to help everyone along with that. So my name is Kody Kinsey. I am a security researcher at Varonis. I host hacking shows on YouTube. That's kind of the short version of what I do. I live in the Treasure State, aka Big Sky Country, and I have worked on the Nullbyte, Hack5, and Security Forward channels where you might have seen me doing tutorials and short projects. I also live stream 2 times per week on the Redia and Security Forward channels. So if you want to join us, make sure to find us on Security Forward. And my specialty is in Wi-Fi hacking, open source intelligence, and microcontrollers. And if we have time for a live demo today, you'll see how those three things can come together in interesting ways. So if you want to talk about some of the stuff you've learned today, feel free to join me on the stream that I do every Wednesday and Friday. Our Wednesday stream is a live Q&A where you can ask questions about this and more. And on Friday, we go through the hacking news and ask and answer any questions that we can as we go along. So make sure to jump in and say hello if you like this demonstration and you want to talk a little bit more about hacking and microcontrollers. All right, so what do I do outside work? Well, I really like urban exploration, photography, and street art. A lot of the Wi-Fi research I've done has actually been around some of the interesting spaces in LA that offer radio silence to do interesting sorts of radio experiments and Wi-Fi experiments. To that end, I've been mapping LA storm drain tunnels since 2015 and documenting street art. And I also love war driving, and I am in the top 100 on wiggle.net. So my current project, aside from working at Varonis as a security researcher, I also make the Wi-Fi Nugget and the USB Nugget. As you can see from the top, has been a very long and expensive process. I have been through, I think we're on 20 plus revisions over the course of 3 years to take some of the microcontrollers that we're going to be talking about today and make them more useful and beginner friendly for people who are just getting started and might be intimidated by just picking up a microcontroller and getting started with it. So these are cat-shaped breakout boards for teaching ethical hacking, and you can support us by purchasing one at redia.io. Be careful, as I found out a couple days ago, people are actually now copying these. So if you look this up, there's some sketchy websites that are actually selling bootleg nuggets, or they don't even send them. It seems like they just kind of just take your money. So be careful if you're looking to pick up one of these. But yeah, this, if you're curious, took, as I said, about 3 years and about $16,000 out of pocket to go through all these prototypes, make mistakes, learn from them, and otherwise get to the point that I am at now. So if you're looking to work on microcontroller project, it seems cheap at first, but once you start getting into making your own custom stuff, it can get expensive very quickly. All right, so if I assume that a lot of people here probably understand the difference between microcontrollers and computers, but for people who are total beginners, let's break down some expectations here. A perfect example of a computer versus a microcontroller is the Raspberry Pi Zero and the Raspberry Pi Pico. So the Pi Zero is a full-on computer. It has HDMI out. It allows for a micro SD card, USB, and all the sorts of things you would want for running a Linux desktop environment. That means that you can bring Kali Linux and all the stuff you already know about hacking to this, and you don't really need to learn anything else. It's just a very low-cost computer that is in an unexpected form factor. There's not really much different from the computers you might have experienced in the past, especially if you work with a lot of Linux computers. On the other hand, the Pi Pico is totally different. There's no HDMI out. There is no SD card slot. It is a simple microcontroller for hardware control and otherwise simple tasks. It supports CircuitPython and Arduino, includes one USB port and 20 GPIO pins, and it costs about $4. Now, you might have noticed that Raspberry Pis have gotten incredibly expensive lately. So the reason for that is often that, there's a shortage of parts on it. And any project that relies on the Pi Zero, like the Ponagachi, for example, might be in short supply right now. So a lot of people are now very curious about what you can do with microcontrollers. And that's really why I got into them, because they're so cheap and I got tired of frying my Raspberry Pi. So first up, let's get some limitations out of the way. When we're working with microcontrollers, what can we not do? Well, generally, a lot of this stuff is centered around Wi-Fi because it's great to have Wi-Fi in microcontrollers, but they only do 2.4 gigahertz. So if you're looking to affect 5 gigahertz, you might be out of luck. Some of them don't have native USB. So when you plug them in, you might need to download drivers or otherwise do something before you can start working with them. And they don't support all the features of like a wireless networking adapter, for example. They're just a little bit on a lower level than that. They also don't have any OS or Linux tools. So if you're expecting to be able to use tools that you've used in Kali Linux, then you're going to be disappointed. And there are some limitations in the libraries like CircuitPython and MicroPython for what you're able to use if you're used to working with Python. Now, there are also some language design limitations. For example, working with USB and CircuitPython is a little tricky. Either the program can access it or the user who's writing code can access it. And it's annoying to switch back and forth between the two if you haven't done it before. And another thing is most of these cannot capture full Wi-Fi handshakes, which honestly kind of turns some people off because that's a very desired feature. Now, okay, now that we've gotten the bad stuff out of the way, let's talk about all the super cool things that you can do with microcontrollers. A lot of them do support HID drive storage, which means you plug it in and it shows up as a keyboard, a mouse, and it can show up as mounted storage. So you can drag and drop code. It has Bluetooth control. They can create Wi-Fi access points. They can host and serve web servers, either for phishing or for practicing hacking. And they have internet access, so they can pull down information off the internet. They are able to support sensors, inputs and outputs, and they support a variety of different programming languages. They can scan for Wi-Fi signals, do IR receive and transmit, meaning they can be used as a remote control, NFC, RFID copying and cloning with the right add-ons, and they can also potentially support sub-gigahertz radio transmit and receiving. Again, this is only kind of a couple of them, but these are generally what we're interested in when we're looking at microcontrollers that support hacking. And finally, we can jam Wi-Fi connections using deauthentication attacks. So what skills do you need to actually get started with this? Well, you just need to be able to flash community projects via a web browser. You can do it by installing Arduino IDE and flashing it that way. And to do that, you just need to learn how to add a custom board and compile and flash the code, which is relatively simple. You can also flash CircuitPython via a web browser, which will show off how easy that is relatively soon. So if you want to take it a step beyond just using other people's tools, then you might want to go into development, which requires a little bit more experience in C++, or Arduino, or Python. Generally, you will probably need to learn a Python command line utilities to do development on this sort of thing, but it's really not that difficult. And with some good research skills, you should be able to get started without any problems. Now, when you're working with microcontrollers, you're generally programming them directly. So while we can flash over other people's compiled programs, we can also program our own customizations. And some projects will actually require this to input details, for example, your Wi-Fi network, if part of the project involves joining it. When you're doing this, you have a choice between compiled and interpreted languages. And generally, interpreted languages are a lot friendlier and kind of easier for beginners to get started with. So when we're talking about microcontroller difficulty, pretty much all of these that we're going to talk about today can be programmed in Arduino IDE. Most of them can be programmed with MicroPython, and only the boards with USB support can be programmed with CircuitPython. But I would say CircuitPython is by far the easiest of the languages that we're going to be kind of skimming over today. Arduino allows you the lowest level control of hardware. You really can customize the way that things are working, and it is a bit more challenging to write and run. There's lots and lots of different hardware libraries available, but for a beginner, the compiler errors are really discouraging. This is actually a successful flash that you're seeing, and all that red just means that it's done and it wasn't able to do one tiny thing. It looks as though this has completely failed, and for a beginner, it can be difficult to determine when there's actually a real problem and when something actually works, which is a little bit strange. When it comes to CircuitPython, there are some design limitations here, but it's super easy for beginners to get started with. Adafruit has really good documentation. Libraries can be added via dragging and dropping, and you can share projects with other people by just sharing a zip file of all the different necessary resources and having them drag and drop it onto their board. Super simple, super easy. I love this for beginners. And then finally, MicroPython is kind of a blend of the two. It's a little bit more difficult to pick up, but it is supported on more boards. And that's because it's a community kind of supported, volunteer supported project that maybe doesn't always have the best documentation, but does allow you to do a lot of interesting things. So why do I like CircuitPython more than MicroPython for beginners? Well, the USB support is really great for being able to just plug it in and get it working immediately. The fact that it works over web serial in a web browser makes it super simple for people to use just a web browser to be able to interact with their device. No command line is needed. And Adafruit in general has really good documentation. So not to say that one is better than the other. I'm just saying that for beginners, this might be the friendlier approach for you to get started working with some of these tools we're going to go over today. And finally, let's talk about price ranges. So I've included the Flipper Zero in this demonstration because it's very famous right now. Lots of people have heard about it. But the price range here is going to be down from 80 cents at our lowest end all the way up to about $120. So we're going to, about $130. So we'll probably see a pretty big variation in capability between those two, but we're going to cover a lot of different projects that use these microcontrollers so you can get a feel for what they're capable of and what you could do if you did buy one of these. So regardless of the type of microcontroller we're talking about today, there's three general ways that you can interact with this microcontroller and put a program on it. The first is to flash a binary file via a browser. Let's say you see a project you like, you download the binary file, and then you can use a browser to just flash that file over to your device. The second would be to flash CircuitPython on your device the same way, and then write CircuitPython code on the device and save it. That code is interpreted in real time. So as soon as you save your code, it is automatically run on the device. There's no compilation necessary, which is really cool for making quick iterations. And then finally, arguably the most difficult way would be programming it in Arduino IDE and then flashing the compiled binary file over. And this is a little bit more involved. It generally works for most people, but I find it to be probably the least beginner friendly out of these three options. I kind of just went over this, so I'm going to skip over these ones. So this is flashing a project via Chrome. If you see on my right, this is in real time what it looks like to work with a web browser to flash over a project that we want to put on one of our microcontrollers. I can select the binary file, and in a web browser, and this is supported in Chrome, Safari, and basically any Chrome-based browser, you can just click Program after selecting a bin file, and the web serial ability will allow you to flash that microcontroller after just plugging it in and going to a website that allows for flashing. So we have made our own custom website to make this flashing process even easier. But the fact that you can now flash a project via a web browser without any sort of command line interface is super, super cool, because a lot of people were intimidated by the command line. And this makes it so that you can easily flash any supported project onto any of the microcontrollers that we're talking about today. All right, so what are, in my opinion, the best microcontrollers for hacking? Well, I have rounded up a list of the usual suspects, and whenever I see an interesting hacking tool, I usually look for one of these microcontrollers to be at its core, because they tend to be very well supported and have a range of very interesting abilities. So first we have the ATtiny85. That is the second from the left on the top. That is in this form factor is a DigiSpark. It's a small 80-cent microcontroller that is very, very easy to find online on Amazon and eBay in large quantities for a very low price. Then we have the ATmega 324U, that's to the right of it. We have the Raspberry Pi Pico, which I actually forgot to photograph, but don't worry, we have plenty of pictures of them later. We have the ESP8266, which is on the bottom right. We have the ESP32, which is on the top left. And then we have the ESP32S2 and the ESP32S3, which are the two purple boards on the bottom left. I also included a ESP32 cam, which is on the top right. That is a integrated camera that has facial recognition abilities, which could be useful depending on what types of projects you're working on. So first, let's talk about the ATtiny85. This is a tiny low-power microcontroller that frequently can be found in the DigiSpark form factor, which makes it really easy to do human interface device attacks because it can identify itself as a keyboard. It can be bought for about 80 cents, And unfortunately, the traces on this do not line up with all USB ports. So you might end up buying a bunch of these and finding out that they do not work with your USB port, and you'll have to get an adapter or something else to get it to work. That is why they are cheap and sometimes a little frustrating. The bad USB attack, which I've documented in a number of different ways, is really easy to do. You can open Arduino IDE, make a basic script for keyboard actions, and then flash this so that when you plug it in, it runs that payload pretty much immediately. Now, these things are finicky. I have had mixed results in the past doing workshops and teaching people with these because, like I said, sometimes someone will have a computer where they just don't line up properly, and they're just incredibly tricky to flash. And in the interim, they're dumping whatever payload you've already loaded on them every time you try to flash. It is a very frustrating experience. And frankly, I kind of hate these little shits when it comes to actually teaching people how to use stuff, or write programs for the first time. It's a little discouraging, and I find that people tend to break them. But if you're looking for an ultra low cost microcontroller that's capable of some rubber ducky style attacks, this is certainly a great option. Now, if you're working from home, you can also set this to identify as a mouse. So if you wanted to, I don't know, move the mouse back and forth to keep you logged into Teams all day, then you can continue to work from home forever by using Arduino IDE to script simple mouse actions back and forth. And you can see this video is pretty popular on my Nullbyte channel, so you can check this out if you want to see more. All right, the next microcontroller is the ATmega 324U, and this is basically a grown-up version of the Digispark, or the previous one, where instead of being sketchy, it is incredibly reliable and actually allows for pretty robust USB actions, meaning you could potentially store multiple different scripts on it and then maybe toggle them via buttons, something like that. There's two different form factors I have listed here. One of them is the Beetle, using the Arduino Leonardo, and then the second one is the Pro Micro. These are probably the most popular two form factors based on the ATmega 324U. They are a lot easier to use, and they're not that much more expensive than the previous version. So they don't have wireless anything. That means they don't have Wi-Fi. They don't have anything like that. But they also do not mount as a USB storage device. So if you're looking to exfiltrate data, or if you're looking to bring your own malware or something, this is probably not the best device for you. However, you can use it for the same types of bad USB attacks that you would use the AT-Tiny. All right, next up, we have the Raspberry Pi Pico. Still no wireless, but it does mount as a USB drive, meaning that we can do Arduino IDE, CircuitPython, and MicroPython, which is great for compatibility. It is based on the RP2040, and there are some interesting projects that run on this. Uh, the cousin to this is the Raspberry Pi Pico W. And if you look at the before and after, you can see on the board, there's kind of a blank spot where that giant Raspberry Pi logo is. On this version, that is filled in with a Infineon CYW 43439, 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi chip. So that gives it the ability to do interesting Wi-Fi things. It's kind of an interesting approach because they slapped on like a whole second microcontroller to do Wi-Fi, but hey, what are you gonna do? It's still pretty cool. So this allows you to do interesting things like WPA3 using the latest Wi-Fi security if you've got an IoT project that really needs security, and it allows you to do Bluetooth as well. So if you're interested in using Python to control Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, this could be an excellent board because it also has native USB. So you really get a lot of the benefits of CircuitPython here when it comes to easily working with radio frequencies in like a Python setting with hardware. So what project could you kind of use the Raspberry Pi Pico and the Pi Pico W to maximize their abilities? Well, the Pico Ducky is a project created by Dave Bailey that allows you to basically create a kind of like USB rubber ducky using CircuitPython. So CircuitPython already has a ducky script library, and this allows you to use the Pi Pico W as a Wi-Fi connected USB rubber ducky. Now, I went ahead and tested this last night, and it didn't work. And I don't know why. Maybe it was my bad. Maybe the project hasn't been updated in a while. But either way, I know that this does work on the Raspberry Pi Pico. So this is a way where you can kind of take the next step and get USB access over the last two microcontrollers. So this way, you can both use CircuitPython, which is really easy for beginners to use, and you can also use wireless protocols to potentially create a Wi-Fi interface for deploying these Ducky script payloads. Very, very cool. All right, so next up we have the ESP8266. This is the star of Wi-Fi hacking microcontrollers. Goes for about $1.73 and is capable of Wi-Fi packet injection, meaning we can lie on the internet effectively, and we can start talking on the Wi-Fi spectrum, saying things that cause interesting effects on other Wi-Fi devices. We can host web servers, and we can also use USB serial chips to communicate with this more easily. Now, there's lots of different modules out there. The most common that you'll see are the Node MCU that's on the top side. And there's three different versions of this. The first two are fine, and the last one is terrible. So if you're interested in working with this form factor, please avoid the V3. As you can see, it is giant for no reason, and it is not worth it. It's just not worth it. The second is the D1 Mini. That's on the lower side. And this is I generally approve of this form factor. I think it's the best way of working with the ESP8266. So I chose the D1 Mini as the basis of my breakout project because I wanted to be able to take the power of this microcontroller, use this very reliable and easy to find form factor, and kind of turn it into something new. Now, if you are a hacker and you want to add a crazy antenna to this, it's worth noting that the Pro version allows you to resolder a tiny little 0 ohm resistor and then put your own antenna on this, which can be great. So this is what I chose to build the Wi-Fi Nugget around. And this is a breakout PCB that allows you to have a screen, NeoPixel, and GPIO, as well as buttons, to take advantage of the features of this microcontroller without having to have it plugged into a computer. We also made a project called Nugget.dev, which allows you to flash supported projects onto this easily, which we'll explore in a little bit. Now, the most interesting project, hands down, that you can do on the ESP8266 is the dauthor. Now, there's two different versions of the dauthor, and you can see them broken down on the corner right here. There's the version 2 and the version 3. Curiously, the version 1 has ceased to exist. Now, what's cool about the version 2 of the Wi-Fi dauthor is that it offers a web, serial, and screen interface, meaning you can connect to this over serial interface. You can use the buttons on the front and the screen to do most of the attacks that are available, and you can also connect over Wi-Fi because it offers a friendly Wi-Fi interface for more advanced attacks. Now, the most interesting attack you can do here is, of course, kicking other devices off of Wi-Fi networks. But you can also create fake access points, and you can create fake probe frames, which can cause Wi-Fi pineapples to reveal themselves by popping up the fake network that you are digging around for with the probe frame. So kind of an interesting side thing we can do. This is a example of the ESP8266 V2 dauthor web interface, which you can access from any Wi-Fi capable device with a screen, like a laptop or a phone. And it honestly is pretty cool to be able to interact with this device wirelessly. However, it doesn't allow you to do some of the more advanced attacks that require the full Wi-Fi radio in order to succeed. So the V3 dauthor allows you to do let's see, the signal string scanner, which lets you track down suspicious Wi-Fi devices or potentially a neighbor who's connected to your network without permission. An authentication scanner, which allows you to pop up fake networks and then see who tries to connect back to them. And then a rogue access point. And this allows you to do things like Wi-Fi phishing. Now, Wi-Fi phishing means that I might be able to find a network that you've connected to before and pop up a fake version of it, and your device will automatically connect to that and then pop up a captive portal, potentially tricking you into entering sensitive information. Now, because it's doing all of this advanced Wi-Fi hacking stuff, that means that it isn't able to support a screen and it isn't able to support a web interface. So while you do have to plug it in and interact with it over serial, you can do all that over the browser. So really, for all the things that you get access to, it's not that much of a trade-off. So if you want to take a look at one of the examples, I've done a Wi-Fi phishing for passwords with cheap microcontrollers demo that goes through the entire process where we scan and find a target and create an access point that they are likely to join. Once they do, we pop up a fake version of that access point and we give them the opportunity to enter a password or something else that the hacker is trying to get. And if we get that password, we can stop the deauthentication attack, which would prevent them from connecting to any other Wi-Fi network. Because basically, if they don't give us up the password, we can continue kicking them off any other Wi-Fi network they attempt to join. We can also do with the V3D author an attack that I kind of created after reading a paper by Matthew Van Hoff called the beacon swarm. So Matthew discovered that if you create a bunch of fake networks that are likely people have joined in the past, then a lot of nearby devices will automatically attempt to join it, which allows you to not only fingerprint that device, also see where they've been in the past, but also potentially do the Wi-Fi phishing attack if we can find an open Wi-Fi network that they've joined in the past. So the technique here is to create hundreds of fake networks and then listen in on devices that recognize the network names and attempt to connect to them based on the network stored inside their trusted network list. If we can find some interesting access points that they've joined in the past, we can learn about where that person has been. And we can also potentially find VIPs, meaning if somebody has joined a sensitive Wi-Fi network before, maybe for a defense contractor or some other sensitive area, we might be able to make a fake version of that in public and detect when one of those employees is nearby, which is a very interesting way of kind of using signals intelligence with microcontrollers to identify important individuals. So another attack that is supported by the ESP8266 is GPS spoofing. So this is an attack that I tried out oh my gosh, in 2020. And the goal here was to see if I could trick a device into thinking that I was inside Mark Zuckerberg's pool. Now, the way that this worked was I had to go into a stairwell and cut myself off from GPS signals and then provide the relative signals that you would see if you were in the Zuckerberg pool area. And what my phone did was took those signals, sent them to an API that locates based on Wi-Fi networks that are nearby, and then that API sent back the location that my phone assumed was where I am. This allows us to, at least in areas that have poor GPS reception, potentially spoof the GPS of devices nearby, which is a very funny thing to do when people are trying to use maps or whatever, and it ends up sending them somewhere very far away. So if you want to check this out, again, it only works in areas where there's poor GPS reception, and it works on a technology called aGPS or assisted GPS, which in cities where GPS signals tend to bounce off buildings and give inaccurate results, Wi-Fi actually gives a better and more immediate position than GPS is able to. So most phones will actually use this fallback method to determine their exact location when GPS is spotty. If you want to try this out, it's probably one of the more fun labs that I've done in the past, and it is supported by just about any ESP8266 microcontroller. Next up, we have war driving. So war driving is the process of driving around or walking around, or in this case, flying around, and attempting to kind of log the position of nearby wireless devices. Now, this could be Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, or even cell towers. But with the ESP8266 and an attached SD card module, it's relatively easy to combine it with the GPS and log all the data as you move around. Now, the result is a database which we can upload to wiggle.net in order to visualize exactly where these networks are. And what's cool about that is we can track down specific individuals, or we can create a map of all the wireless devices around us in order to find common open Wi-Fi networks, identify vulnerable networks, or even track people via Bluetooth devices. So while the ESP8266 doesn't support Bluetooth, many of the other devices we're going to cover today do. And there's a lot of things like tire pressure sensors or car stereos, which create a Bluetooth signal and never change their MAC address, which would be vulnerable to tracking and surveillance from a technique like this. So if you want to see this demo where we basically wired up an ESP8266, a GPS, and a SD card module, and then attempted to track our friend's phone while flying around, you can check out this link here. And if you want to make your own, it is super simple to do this. In fact, it was one of the easier projects we've done, was using a drone, a DJI drone, to track the specific location of someone, then go back and be able to identify them on footage based on the Wi-Fi heat map of where our targeted networks were found. So there are some limitations to the ESP8266. One of the major limitations is that it cannot see anything except Wi-Fi packet headers. That means that when you're doing sniffing, you can see metadata just like the NSA, and the NSA is happy with metadata, so it's not that bad. We can determine the presence of Wi-Fi devices, we can learn about them, we can kind of learn about their manufacturer, but we can't actually do things like capture, handshakes, just metadata. So while we can do war driving and learn a lot about traffic, we can't do handshake capture, and we can't do some of the more advanced attacks that might require things like 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. Now, 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi has been a limitation of microcontrollers for a very long time. But in the future, in the very immediate future, there will be some new microcontrollers released that do have 5 gigahertz that will hopefully address this problem. Another issue is while you can actually use the ESP8266 as a NAT router, meaning it works as a wireless network extender, it's actually kind of amazing. It sucks for that. It is not very powerful and it is incredibly slow. So unless you're using it as a target to set up and knock down, it is not very good for actually routing traffic. The other thing is there's no native USB support, which means that if you want to just plug this in and start working with it, you might be out of luck until you install a couple of drivers. So next up is the ESP32. This is more powerful than the ESP8266. It supports Arduino, MicroPython, but not CircuitPython. And that's because just like the ESP8266, it does not support native USB. It also does not support Wi-Fi attacks. And that's interesting because as soon as Espressif, the company that makes this microcontroller, saw what people were doing with the ESP8266, they locked that stuff down in their newest version, which was the ESP32. So some of the attacks like deauthentication that are possible with the ESP8266 are not possible with the ESP32. And that is definitely a disappointment to some people who want an all-in-one Wi-Fi attack microcontroller. Now, it is useful for applications like video and basic routing. So if you wanted to create a NAT router with this, it's actually pretty decent at it. And I have to say, I was kind of impressed by the way it acts as a wireless network extender. Now, one thing that I found very cool is that Stefan Kremser made a ESP32 packet capture library that allows you to capture full packets. Now, you can run this on an SD card or over serial and open it in Wireshark. And I have never managed to get it to succeed at capturing a full handshake. I haven't really tried too many times, but in theory, this should be capable of grabbing Wi-Fi handshakes. In practice, I've never been able to actually get it to work. So while it is possible to capture full packets and do a little bit more than the ESP8266 can, I haven't in practice actually seen it grab a handshake. So I would love to see it. I think when it's integrated into the Marauder project, I have seen it capture handshakes, but at least on its own, I haven't seen it do so. So one kind of limitation on that. Again, it does work great as a NAT router. So if you want to try this out, and if you want to see one of the videos I've done that teaches you how to build your own hackable router, you can create a little router that you can attack as much as you want. No one will get mad at you. Or you can even segment your IoT devices to make it so that if someone were to hack into it, they would just be getting access to this little, this little like side IoT device and not to your entire home network. So one final project I found very cool on the ESP32 is offline chat. You can actually create a web server that allows you to host a clandestine conversation, meaning any device in Wi-Fi range can join and chat in a private chat room. So this is great for anonymous messages or a CTF. If you wanted to host a chat room in a place that doesn't have infrastructure, all you need is power, and you could probably do this over solar in order to host a little web server to exchange information. Now, that's really cool. And I've seen more scaled up versions be used for things like in a disaster, being able to like post like lost pet posters or things like that in a place that everybody can see them. But for decentralized communication, it's actually a pretty cool little platform for working on that sort of thing. Now, if you want to combine these two microcontrollers, the ESP8266 and the ESP32, then theoretically you would be able to get the strength of the Wi-Fi attacks of the ESP8266 and the full packet capture of the ESP32. And that is exactly what the Marauder has done. So the Marauder is a board that marries these two circuit boards together and allows you to do both deauthentication and handshake capture. So this ends up being kind of a multi-tool. And while I don't have one myself, well, actually, I do have one myself, but I took it apart. While I don't have a working one myself at the moment, there have also been attempts to get this working with the Flipper Zero, and I watched the instructions for it last night, and they were too complicated. So I'm not going to be featuring that, but it is possible, which is very interesting and cool. So next we have the ESP32 cam. Now the ESP32 is set up to work as a webcam or process video and have extra processing power left over. So the ESP32 cam is an integrated camera that allows you to do basic facial recognition, but doesn't have a USB port or native USB. So if you're looking at programming it, you need to get like a FTDI friend or some other way of interacting with it, because otherwise it is a little frustrating for beginners to start working with it. Now, it is worth it because the ability to do basic facial recognition allows for all sorts of hilarious things you can do. Being able to recognize an individual face is relatively simple to set up, but of course, it can be fooled very easily by a photo. And frankly, the reliability isn't 100%. So if you're going to be setting up like a remote turret or something with this, I would highly recommend against using it for identification because it is prone to false positives. And I also found I was able to trick it by wearing some sunglasses with a face on it, or just by wearing a shirt with a face on it. It was able to get confused pretty easily. Now, it's cool that you can use this to alert on known or unknown faces and potentially run code based on identifying someone's face. So if you have a facial recognition based project that you're looking to do, then this could be the answer for you. Next up is the ESP32S2. Now, this is kind of the sweet spot of ESP chips because it supports Wi-Fi, has native USB, and it comes in a module that is ping compatible with the D1 Mini that I mentioned earlier. So it does everything that you would need to do to have a bad USB chip all in one that has Wi-Fi access. And that's why we picked it to make the USB Nugget. Now, the USB Nugget is the ESP32S2 version of the Wi-Fi Nugget, and it has a HID tool written in Arduino that uses the Wi-Fi radio to create this web interface for creating bad USB payloads and injecting them in whatever computer that you have it plugged into. Supports payloads for any operating system, and it also allows you to plug in and use the native USB to pop up a web interface, to pop up a text file and write your own payloads directly. So there's a lot of ways to use it, and that's really why I like this microcontroller, because when designing a breakout board around it, I was able to add a lot of different features that I wanted here for beginners who maybe have just worked with CircuitPython or haven't worked with a microcontroller before. So what is supported on the ESP32S2? Well, one is CircuitPython. And because CircuitPython also has native USB libraries, that means we can do mouse control. So of course, we can work from home forever, just like we can do with some of the cheaper microcontrollers, but also we can use that Wi-Fi ability to change the mouse behavior or even trigger it to start moving the mouse when a certain Wi-Fi network or device is present or not present, which is really super cool. There's also a port of the Pico W. So the Pico W, as we saw before, was a HID attack program written in CircuitPython for the Pi Pico. Well, I went ahead and ported it to the ESP32S2. And if you have it plugged into a USB Nugget, then it also offers this cute little uwu face that lets you deploy CircuitPython payloads. So this is all documented here under the Rubber Nugget project, but it uses the built-in CircuitPython Ducky script library to parse Ducky script payloads and inject them over Wi-Fi or by pressing a button. So I was very pleased with this project because I am a terrible programmer. So if I can write this trash fire and make it look good, you can write something too. So last of the CircuitPython projects that I wrote was the Damn Vulnerable Nugget. So I have always been inspired by deliberately vulnerable projects that let you sharpen your skills. And I was learning about web application hacking one day, and the online resource I was using went down, and I was frustrated because I wanted to use OWASP Zap or Burp Suite to practice like brute forcing things. So I went ahead and programmed this CircuitPython Cat Fanciers Association eCat online service login page. And it doesn't actually break into your precious Cat Fanciers Association account. Don't worry, it's just a simulation, but it lets you learn how to use OWASP Zap or Burp Suite to find the username and password of the service and then log in. And when you do, it gives you these slightly wet anime eyes to let you know that you have succeeded in your quest. So I really like being able to stand up a web server on this and have it either connect to your Wi-Fi network so you can just attack it from your own network, or create its own access point so you can join that and attack it without needing to worry about, maybe accidentally attacking something else or getting in trouble for attacking things or practicing on things you're not supposed to. So part of the point of microcontrollers is not just using them as attack tools, but also using them as games, using them as CTFs, and using them as something to practice legally security skills without getting in trouble. So if you want to try out the Damn Vulnerable Nugget, it works on any ESP32S2 chip. However, if you want the cute face, then it's got to be in the Nugget. So what kind of limitations do we have with the ESP32S2? It sounds great, but could we have more? Well, yes, it does not have Bluetooth. And that is something that I've wanted for a while because the Flipper actually does have Bluetooth. And that's the secret to it doing a lot of very cool things. There's also no Wi-Fi attacks. So just like the ESP32, it is not able to do the jamming attacks that the ESP8266 can do. So that is definitely a limitation you might want to consider if you are looking at grabbing one of these. So then we also have no 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. So often people will say, hey, I'm doing a deauthentication attack on my device and it's not working. Nowadays, most routers will create a 2.4 gigahertz and a 5 gigahertz network that have the same name and seamlessly transfer a device between the two if one of them is unavailable, meaning your device might be getting kicked off the 2.4 gigahertz network and then just transitioning on over to the 5 gigahertz network instead, which makes it pretty difficult for you to affect it because this microcontroller can't talk on that frequency. So in the future, we hope to see some of these features be added. And spoiler alert, they actually have been added in the new ESP32 S3. All right, so from the S2 to the S3, what do we get? Well, we get the support of Bluetooth, and Bluetooth LE allows us to maybe create like an application to connect to this, and then have it like do something via a web app or a like a native app for like iOS or Android. It also allows us to do Bluetooth scans. So when we're doing war driving, we can include Bluetooth data, and that's really particularly interesting for all those Bluetooth devices that never change their identifier. That's everything from police body cameras to tire pressure sensors to car stereos, all that stuff. And maybe even like headphones, things like that. All that stuff that you carry around with you can potentially identify your location and be used to build a map of where you're going. And these microcontrollers would definitely be able to read those signals. And when combined with a SD card and a GPS, be able to do all sorts of interesting war driving. It also supports native USB, and you can buy these now. In fact, if you look in the lower right, you can see some recently created S3 prototype nuggets in which we're testing out some USB features. So finally, we have the Flipper Zero. This is at the extreme high end of the spectrum here. And the Flipper Zero is actually a number of different microcontrollers all on a single board. Now, this goes above the price range of most of the things we're talking about, but I wanted to shout it out as a true example of how useful microcontrollers can be when they're all combined together. So it's based on a dual-core ARM STM32WB55. It has Bluetooth Low Energy built into that chip and 2 cores, one for quick operations and one for complex tasks. One of them actually manages the Bluetooth, and then the other manages the rest of the firmware. It also has a Texas Instruments CC1101 chip for radio transmission and receiving in the 300 to 900 megahertz range. That's the sub-gigahertz radio. And it has a ST25R3916 used for NFC communication. There's more stuff on there, but those are the major chips that it uses. And by combining these together and creating a great interface, it's capable of doing a lot of crazy things. Now, while I do this, I'm also going to play the Flipper Wall of Gore. If you go onto the Flipper Discord server, you can see that people have absolutely thrown themselves into working with the Flipper Zero, tearing it apart, figuring out how it works, and modifying it to do all sorts of interesting things. So if you're looking for some examples of people pushing the boundaries of what can be done with these microcontrollers, behold all of the ways that these poor flippers have been destroyed. So what is interesting about the Flipper Zero? What can it do that people are really interested in and like to play with a lot? Well, IR control of devices is the number one thing. I see most people controlling, turning off TVs, changing the channel, setting things they're not supposed to set, turning off the menu at fast food restaurants. We also have replaying car, garage door, doorbell, and pager signals. This is sub-gigahertz radio stuff where you're able to isolate a signal and then replay it in a way that's funny, interesting, or causes a thing to happen. We can also copy some NFC hotel cards and other sorts of cards. But when it comes to like transit cards or other sorts of cards that have any sort of protection, it really can't do too much around that. Although the developer team has commented that they're looking at adding support for these in the near future. You can also flip open Tesla charging ports, which I find to be one of the funnier things you can do. Watching a symphony of Teslas all opening their charging port at the same time is a beautiful thing to witness. And frankly, one of the funnier things you can do. Now, outside of that, there are some other things you can do with the Flipper. It works as a bad USB device, and there are some add-ons to it that make it more useful. However, I find that most people end up using these categories more than any other thing. I have yet to ever see an iButton in person more than once in my entire life, and some of the other features are just not quite as useful as you might expect. just having watched what people have done with this and the way that people have posted their flipper wins on the internet. All right, so let's talk about future boards for hacking. There are a couple boards that are not generally available yet that look really interesting for hacking, some more than others. So the first one, this actually is available right now, is the ESP32C3, not the S3, the C3. And that's important because the C3 supports Bluetooth 5, supports 2.4 gigahertz, but has no native USB. So this is kind of seen as a replacement for the ESP8266, although it does not support Wi-Fi attacks, which makes it a little bit less sexy to me, honestly. I'm just not as interested in this ESP32C3 as much as I am in the S series. So the lack of native USB means that there's usually there wouldn't be CircuitPython for it, but it turns out that CircuitPython now works over Bluetooth for some devices, and it looks like it actually might be supported, which is really cool. So this is something I'm keeping an eye on as a low-cost alternative to the ESP8266 if I want a little bit of an upgrade, but the loss of ability to do Wi-Fi attacks is definitely something that holds me back a little bit here. Now, the one I'm really excited about is the ESP32C5. Now, this is the first 5 gigahertz microcontroller by Espressif, and of course, it doesn't have native USB, but it does support Bluetooth. So the fact that it has 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi means that you can do some interesting scanning, war driving, and other things that you just can't do with these current microcontrollers that are available. So while there's no development board out there quite yet, I'm really excited to see when this one comes out, although I definitely wish that it had native USB. So we've got about 15 minutes. I want to do a little signals intelligence demo where I show off how you can use one of these microcontrollers, in this case, the ESP8266, to use open source intelligence and do a little bit of signals intelligence. So our goal is going to be to use the ESP8266 to identify a VIP, somebody who's really important. And in a real world scenario, maybe I'm a red teamer who's looking to catch one of our employees out and about at a conference or something like that, not paying attention or otherwise unaware. Now, the attack I'm going to do would be able to potentially steal that employee's connection, meaning that their phone would automatically connect to a rogue access point and allow me to see what they're doing and also potentially manipulate anything that they see, meaning I could pop up a phishing page or otherwise control what they see on the internet. So let's go ahead and see if I can do this demo. One sec. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and plug in a ESP8266 microcontroller, and I am currently over at the Nugget.dev website, which is a website that my team has created to easily flash over the microcontroller projects that are supported and make it so that it's just easy to use. So I'm going to connect in the browser my microcontroller. I can see that it is connected. I can also see a list of all the different projects that are supported by this microcontroller, and I'm going to select the Advanced Deauthor V3, and there's the note that there's no screen supported here. The reason I'm doing that is I want to be able to do these more advanced Wi-Fi attacks, and the V2 version just doesn't support the kind of stuff that I'm going to want to do here. So I'm going to go ahead and flash this over, and while that's flashing, I'm going to begin scoping out my target. So the target here, of course, is going to be America's most important association, the Cat Fanciers Association. They have been celebrating cats since 1906, and there are a few more patriotic or critical infrastructure organizations out there. So we are going to go ahead and use them as our example here. And I do apologize to the CFA for repeatedly using them as a target in these sorts of demonstrations. So if we wanted to find a CFA executive, a real big shot, somebody who's involved in important decision making, we might want to use our microcontroller to trick one of their phones into trying to connect back to us. Oh, gorgeous. So we're going to go ahead and click on contacts and use a little bit of open source intelligence to find out how we might be able to unmask the phone or smartphone or laptop of somebody who belongs to the CFA. So we can see the Cat Fanciers Association is headquartered on 260 East Main Street in Alliance, Ohio. And if we go on our trusty wiggle.net database, we can actually look up this address and attempt to find if somebody has war driven the official Wi-Fi network of the CFA. Now, of course, this would work on just about anything, defense contractors, like any important organization. But of course, we really want to focus on the heavy hitters on this demo. So let's go ahead and scope out the CFA. Now, here's the address, East Main Street, Alliance, and I can zoom in and I can see that around this area, somebody has indeed wardrobed this entire region. Now, if I look around, there's some things that look like, maybe they're home networks. There's a Spectrum network, but then we have this CFA Co. It looks like this is actually the correct network here. We have CFA CO. That seems like cat fancier organization company or something like that. Like, seems like we've struck gold here, and we actually have found the correct Wi-Fi network for the CFO organization. So this is great. That means that we can use our microcontroller to pop up a fake version of this and lure any device that's connected to the CFO organization to giving up its prior communication with that network. So basically, when you connect to a Wi-Fi network, it's permanently stored in a trusted network list in your phone. And most people never get rid of this list. So if you're the member of an important organization and you've joined the public, like Wi-Fi network of their headquarters that anybody driving by can see, it's very likely that this attack would be able to reveal where you've been in the past, the fact that you've joined that network before. So it looks like this is now done flashing. In order to get it going, I'm going to unplug it and plug it back in to run the new firmware. And I believe I'm going to use this serial terminal in order to get started. So I'm going to use this web-based serial terminal. And because we're using the v3 deauthor, I want to go ahead and use the same serial terminal that the creator of this project, Spacehoon, made, just because projects that are made for each other tend to work better. But there are a number of different websites you can use to establish a web serial communication with a microcontroller. This just has very pretty syntax highlighting, so I like it. So I'm going to connect to my device. And then to make sure that everything's working, I can type help. And yep, I successfully flashed this. I can see all of the options I have access to, and I can start my attack. So I'm going to type help AP, and this is going to give me all of the different settings I can do to create a fake access point. Now, I'm going to copy the access point name of the Cat Fanciers Association. So I'm going to type AP for access point, and then quotes CFA Co. And if I wanted to, I could actually take this a step further. And if I wanted to try to break into the CFA's like Wi-Fi network, I could try to extract a handshake from our CFO big shot nearby. So if I created a fake network that had a password, their phone would attempt to join it and actually give up a hash of the real Cat Fancier organization's password. So I could potentially intercept this with my computer on Wireshark or something like that, crack it, and then be able to send like a microcontroller in like a box or something over to their office, have it hack their office, and then when it gets returned, leave no trace. So a lot of really cool stuff you can do with getting devices to use that stored trusted network list accidentally. So, okay, if I run this command, it should create an access point called CFA Co. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. And now, if there's any devices nearby that have seen this, right now there's no Wi-Fi password here. We can see it's an open Wi-Fi network. But if there's any devices nearby that have seen this in the past, then they should automatically connect. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the Wi-Fi on my phone. There we go. And I can see we now have a connected device. It's been given an IP address. And on my phone, it's now popping up a phishing page. So it's asking for my password. So if I was a CFA executive and I saw like a VPN update required by the Cat Fanciers Association, please apply this update and type in your Cat Fanciers password. I'd be like, okay, I'm going to type in my password. I love cats123, submit. And there we go. I've intercepted the password, and I've used this little cat-shaped microcontroller to actually reveal and then potentially phish a CFA executive. Okay, so that's my little demo. I did this all in a browser, by the way. So no command line stuff necessary. This was something you can do with pretty much any ESP8266 based microcontroller. But of course, having it all work through this is something my team has worked very hard on. So you're always free to pick up a Nugget if you want to support us. So what are my takeaways from this? Well, if I can play this again, I learned this in about 3 years. Microcontrollers are way more fun to abuse, destroy, short circuit, let the magic smoke out, anything you want to do than a Raspberry Pi, especially because Raspberry Pis have spiked in cost and dropped in availability. So if you want to get into something fun that still has a lot of the same abilities you might expect to get from a Raspberry Pi, these are a tiny bit more challenging to work with, but honestly, the learning curve is dropping more and more all the time. And if you're going to blow up a device, it might as well be an 80-cent one to a $10 one. instead of one that's like $250. A lot of these attacks are meaningful and can be done for less than $5 on your own if you really want to get into the weeds with this. And you do not need to be a computer scientist to try to a lot of these projects. You can copy and paste them, make small modifications, learn how they work, and be able to kind of do this without much of a background, except maybe a little bit of Python programming or just some good research skills to be able to copy and paste or just use the browser to flash supported projects. So there is a place for all different skill levels in hardware hacking. If you're a complete beginner, CircuitPython is going to be a great resource for you. And if you're an advanced Arduino person that loves making custom stuff, these new microcontrollers that support Bluetooth, native USB, bad USB attacks, like all these great features like Wi-Fi, they're going to be really appealing to you because you can make really, really powerful hacking tools and do really interesting hacking demos with a very limited budget. So that's all the time I have, or rather, that's all the content I have. I think I've got like 5 minutes. I want to thank everybody for coming. And if you want to check out some of my classes and content, you can go to hack.gay. Happy Pride Month, by the way. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Kody Kinsey, or join our Discord server at nugget.lol, where you can post questions that we will answer live on the stream every week. And also you can ask questions about microcontrollers. If you're interested in the topic, there's a lot of people in that community who care about that a lot and are happy to answer your questions. And if you want to pick up any of the boards that I've mentioned today, you can support our team by buying a USB Nugget or a Wi-Fi Nugget at redia.io, or by scanning the QR code.
Awesome. Kody, thank you. That was an awesome presentation. You are great at presenting it. Really cool stuff. I know I learned a little bit. Thanks for joining us. You're great. I'm just super impressed.
Happy to be here. It's a lot of fun.
All right, great. Well, that wraps up our content for the day. We're really happy for everybody who joined us today at the IoT Village for our portion of NahamCon. Make sure, if you're not already following our Twitch channel, you follow us. We're going to do more cool stuff on Twitch in the future, maybe some demos, maybe some other fun stuff. And of course, check us out on Twitter, both at IoT Village and for us at ISE Security for ISE. And with all that said, thanks so much, and we'll see you all very soon. Take care.